let's say, religious person. I don't know if there is a God, but I do know that a lot of things are happening that are not necessarily explainable, and some people attribute those to God. So probably that's what happened here. My take is that misunderstandings are they come up out of nowhere, and in every organization you will have misunderstandings automatically. I mean, you start with a common idea and then it sort of diverses. Now I'll come back to a point later where I say that this diversity does have its own benefits, but if you don't see that and you don't manage that, then you will have a serious problem. So what happened after the language was confounded, was spread out? They left building the tower because they no longer had the capability to coordinate that work. But the Bible says they left off to build the city. So after all, even with their common language taken away, or maybe because their language was taken away, the common language taken away, they were able to achieve things. Now I'm not going to go through the rest of the Bible, but I think there are some interesting ways of looking at that. So my talk is about large organizations, and since you're in this room, I assume that you have worked for or within or as a contractor to large organizations. I have for the greater part of my professional life, and I know it can be very painful. That's why I'm bringing my lessons to you, and hope that you can avoid some of that pain. And it doesn't really matter if it's for profit or non-profit. Size matters. You know? Large government organizations have the same types of power struggles, the same types of problems as profit organizations. Generally speaking, the diversity within profit organizations is greater than against non-profit organizations. I also assume that what you're trying to do in your work is related to technology, is related to the potential things that you can do with technology, and for a lot of you it's also related to what the risks of that are, and the way that we sort of underestimate or overestimate those risks. So if you don't recognize that, then feel free to leave. Just don't make too much noise. But this is my assumption about you. So the first question, if you're an independent thinker, and most of you are, I think large organizations are inflexible, inefficient. How come they still exist? Right? Well, this sums up a number of the lessons that I've learned, and there's actually quotes from somebody else. But large organizations, sort of, once they get going, nothing's going to stop them. It's harder. In large organizations, it can be very hard to start a project. But it can be even harder to stop it. And for a metaphor, if you just go out hiking or do whatever, on your own, you go quicker. Because you're not held up by the slowest person in the group. But with a group, you can carry more, you can divide more work. And in the end, you'll end up further, if you want to. So what I'm going to try to give you is what's the data model of an organization, or parts of it, because it's way too big. How can we program the organization to get out of it what we want to get out of it, like the coffee story I told earlier, and what are the typical bugs and problems that we see in organizations. Of course, this is all my personal view and experience, and I have the story to share with you. Most of you will probably disagree with parts of it. That will be an interesting discussion tonight at the bar. Right now, this is the story. Feel free to think otherwise. So, what about what you can call the data model of organization? What's it all about? Well, one way of looking at this is that large organizations exist because there was a power structure, and the power structure holds it all together. If there's no power structure, it falls apart pretty soon. What is this power about? Well, it's about allocating the resource, like the money, the bright guys, all the stuff that's an asset of the organization. People, process, all technology. And it's a finite resource in general, so you have to allocate it over bits and pieces of the organization. And it's the power structure that describes how that works. And the power structure also allocates the risk associated with handling those resources. And I'll come back to that later. But if you drive this to an extreme, then what you see in some organizations is that power is used in a perverse way let's say that somebody says, well, I think the world looks like this and I want you to think the same thing. And that's where it gets beyond being productive. But it happens because the let's say, Winston Churchill once said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when the checks and balances are not in place, that kind of stuff can happen. Now, we all tend to think of power struggles as getting in the way of what we try to achieve in organizations. But I think that they're inherent in large organizations. If you don't have a power struggle, that means that the organization does not exist, in a way. Like Scott McIntyre, it's a parallel with what Scott McIntyre said yesterday. If I don't see a denial of service attack on my network, then the internet is probably down. Right? So these power struggles, they pop up all the time. That's the dynamics of how the world moves forward. And if you carry them to completion in a productive way, then they lead to a decision and a common goal in the organization that allows the organization to move forward productively. But when that process gets stalled in a way, then it can actually paralyze the organization's progress. A client that I worked for half a year ago or so had a situation like this with their IT department and the telephone department. They both they were confident that they would need to have to build some kind of common infrastructure. They wanted to do a lot with wireless access. And neither of them was big enough to get the money to do it themselves, because there was a huge building and they need 4,000 or 5,000 access points. But they kept disagreeing on how they would start doing that, what the priorities were and what the technology choices were. And that had stalled that decision for approximately 2 years. So there was 2 years of no progress because of this power struggle. And with it wasn't what I did, but it was what somebody else did, and I just helped them. They resolved this power struggle, and then everything went downhill from there. It went smooth as a ride. So resolving those power struggles is inherent part of making progress in organizations. Now, I'm getting back to risks. I promised that to you. What are the risks in an organization? Like, well, you should know, adopting new technology, developing a new product, entering a new market. These are all risky things for organizations because they can fail. And if they can fail, it means you can lose money, or you can even can go broke. And if you're a government organization, you can sort of get voted away or eliminated. So it's a risk. And organizations hate that risk because it's a threat to their existence. Every risk means, every single bit of risk can sort of explode. We all know the stories, like, and these days it would be like, if an organization doesn't have internet for a week, would it still exist? Right? That's a risk. But on the other side, organizations, if they're smart, they also love risk, because the risk